It started like any other hike. On September 19, 1991, a German couple, Helmut and Erika Simon, were trekking through the Alps, near the Austrian-Italian border. The snow had just begun to melt after a scorching summer, revealing rocky trails long buried under glacial ice. They were just over 10,000 feet above sea level. Exhausted but exhilarated, that's when they saw something strange. At first, they thought it was trash, maybe a backpack or a broken ski pole lodged in the ice. But as they got closer, they realized it was a human body, a head, a shoulder, part of a torso, dark brown, leathery skin, frozen in place, arms twisted, the upper half of the body jutting out of a melting glacier. They thought it was the lost climber, maybe someone who had died recently, say, 10 or 20 years ago. They weren't alarmed. They were curious. They snapped a few photos, marked the spot, and reported it when they got back to town. But what no one knew, not them, not the police, not even the archaeologist at first, was that they had just stumbled upon one of the oldest, most well-preserved human bodies ever found. And not just preserved like a mummy, preserved like a time capsule. This man, eventually nicknamed Ötzi after the Alps where he was found, would turn out to be over 5,000 years old. He lived in the Copper Age, long before the pyramids were built, before Stonehenge, even before written history in most parts of the world. And he didn't just fall asleep in the snow. He had been killed, shot in the back with an arrow, bludgeoned, left to die alone in the mountains, suddenly. This wasn't just an archaeological miracle, it was a murder scene, a crime committed 53 centuries ago. And the glacier had kept everything: the body, the tools, the clothes, even the contents of his stomach almost perfectly intact. The Alps had become a freezer, and Ötzi was a prehistoric cold case, waiting to be reopened. What followed was a scientific investigation unlike anything before it. Multiple countries fought over ownership. Autopsies were performed, scans analyzed, weapons reconstructed, and theories began to swirl. Who was Ötzi? Was he a warrior, a hunter, a fugitive, a sacrifice? And most importantly, who killed him and why? In the chapters ahead, we'll follow the evidence like detectives, from blood traces to ancient tattoos, from stomach contents to forensic CT scans. But it all started here with a casual hike, a melting glacier, and a body that waited 5,300 years to tell its story. They say history repeats itself, but what about the parts we forgot? Welcome to Echoes of History, the channel where we dig up the dusty corners of the past to uncover the weird, the wild, and the wait, what? Stories they didn't teach you in school. Grab your curiosity and maybe a cup of tea, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. Ötzi didn't live in a cave. He wasn't some grunting, fur-wearing savage wandering through the forest. He was a man of his time, and his time was far more advanced than most people think. He lived around 3300 BCE, during the Copper Age, a fascinating but fragile transition between the Stone Age and the coming age of metal and cities. This was a time when the world was just beginning to shift. Tools were evolving from stone to copper. Farming had spread across Europe, changing the way humans lived, ate, and died. Communities were forming proto-societies with trade routes, roles, even early spiritual beliefs. Ötzi wasn't some isolated hermit. He was part of this shifting world, and his body carried clues of a man deeply involved in it. Let's start with what he wore. When scientists thawed and examined his body, they were shocked to find his clothing was layered and functional, a survivalist outfit. A goatskin coat stitched with grass fibers, leggings made of goat and deer hide, a fur hat likely used for warmth and weather protection, and grass-filled shoes that acted like early insulation boots. This wasn't primitive. This was custom, multi-material cold weather gear designed by someone who knew the mountains. Then came his tools. Strapped to Ötzi's body was a small but powerful arsenal, a copper axe, the oldest preserved of its kind, with a cast copper blade riveted to a U-handle, a flint dagger, perfectly shaped and stored in a sheath, a longbow, unfinished but clearly being prepared, a quiver with 14 arrows, some complete, some broken, some waiting to be fletched, and a birch bark container likely used to carry embers. An ancient fire starter kit. Whoever he was, this man was armed, skilled, and traveling prepared. Then there were his tattoos, not decorative but functional. Over 60 carbon ink tattoos marked his joints and spine, placed in areas now associated with chronic pain or acupuncture points. Was this early medicine? Ritual healing? It suggested Ötzi lived in a culture that understood the body in ways we're only now beginning to piece together. And what about his health? CT scans revealed he had heart and arteries, signs of Lyme disease, worms in his gut, and extensive wear and tear on his joints. He was around 45 years old, ancient by the standards of his time, likely a respected elder, or perhaps someone of high social standing. But what truly fascinated scientists was what was inside his stomach. His last meal was remarkably detailed. Fatty ibex meat, einkorn wheat, possibly fermented plants or herbs uses. Medicine or seasoning. He wasn't starving. He wasn't lost. He was well-fed, prepared, and moving with purpose through the mountains. Which raises the question, if he was so prepared, why did he die up there? Because buried inside all this data is a much darker mystery. He wasn't just a traveler. He was a marked man. For years, people assumed he had simply frozen to death, caught in a storm, alone in the Alps. Tragic, yes, but accidental. But science, as always, had other ideas as technology advanced. Researchers re-examined C's body, this time using high-resolution CT scans, DNA testing, and 3D reconstructions. What they found flipped the story completely: the arrow in his back. In 2001, a radiologist spotted something no one had noticed before: a tiny, triangular object lodged in C's left shoulder. It was a stone arrowhead, still embedded in the soft tissue, near his lungs, and it had torn through an artery. That wound alone would have been fatal. In minutes, he didn't freeze to death. He was shot down, and it gets more suspicious. The arrow shaft had been broken off, likely by the attacker to avoid leaving evidence. Or maybe he tried to remove it himself, in a desperate act of survival. Head trauma, but the arrow wasn't the only injury. CT scans of his skull revealed signs of blunt force trauma, blow to the back of the head that likely caused his brain to swell. The bleeding showed he was still alive when it happened. Was he attacked from behind after the arrow? Was he executed to ensure silence? Defensive wounds to his hands and arms showed cuts and bruises consistent with close combat. A deep cut between his thumb and index finger, multiple nicks across the knuckles, a gash on his right hand down to the bone. These weren't the wounds of a hunter. They were defensive wounds, the kind you get trying to fend off a blade. Missing gear, even more curious. Several of his belongings were left untouched: his copper axe, his dagger, his clothing. But others were missing. His unfinished arrows had been damaged on purpose. His bowstring was gone. His backpack frame was there, but the pack itself was missing. Someone had time to take certain items, but not others. It suggests the attack was targeted, but also rushed, perhaps done in a panic, or as part of an ambush. The blood trail, then came the bombshell. DNA analysis of the blood on C's gear showed it wasn't all his. On his dagger, scientists found the blood of another person. On one of his arrows, the blood of a second person. On his coat, traces of a third and fourth individual. This wasn't just a murder. It might have been a fight for his life against multiple attackers. Or perhaps he had wounded others before falling himself. Was he the hunter or the hunted? Either way, his final hours were anything but peaceful. C's body tells a story of violence, betrayal, and desperation. But who would want him dead? Was it a robbery gone wrong? A tribal feud? A political assassination from a forgotten village hierarchy? Or something even more personal? With a deadly arrow in his back, a smashed skull, and blood from multiple people on his weapons, one thing was clear: Steve was murdered. But why? He wasn't rich, at least, not in the modern sense. He had valuable tools, sure, but many were left untouched. This didn't look like a robbery. It looked personal. So, who killed Steve? And what could have happened in his final days that turned a mountain pass into a crime scene? Let's explore the leading theories, starting with the simplest. 1. The robbery gone wrong theory. At first glance, this feels logical. A man alone in the mountains, carrying rare gear, especially a copper axe, which would have been extremely valuable at the time. But here's the twist. The axe was still there. So was his dagger, his arrows, his clothing. If someone wanted his stuff, they left behind the best parts. So, unless the killer was in a hurry or panicked, the robbery theory doesn't quite hold up. 2. The tribal feud theory. Remember, Steve wasn't living in isolation. DNA evidence showed he was part of a distinct alpine population. He may have belonged to a clan, a tribe, or an early farming village. It's possible he got caught up in intertribal violence. Maybe he was a warrior or a messenger. Maybe his clan had tensions with a neighboring group. He was ambushed. Supporting this theory, his combat-ready gear, the presence of multiple attackers, the fact he may have fought back. But if this was a group hit, why the secrecy? Why leave the body? Was it meant to send a message, or was it done in desperation? 3. The exile theory, one of the most intriguing ideas. What if Steve wasn't on a mission, but on the run? His body shows signs of stress in the days before his death. He had old wounds healing. He was malnourished before his final meal. He moved fast through mountainous terrain, possibly fleeing. Some experts believe he might have committed a crime, killed someone, broken a taboo, or lost favor in his community, and someone, or some group, came after him. In this theory, the murder wasn't about greed or politics, it was revenge for the betrayal theory. Now this is where it gets dramatic. What if Steve wasn't killed by strangers, but by someone he knew? The arrow shot from behind, the close-range head wound. The effort to remove the arrow shaft, these all hinted at a calculated attack, possibly by someone who wanted the death to look like an accident. Maybe a jealous rival, a dispute over leadership or land, a falling out with a traveling companion. He may have eaten a big meal, slept by a fire, and then was struck while resting. One archaeologist even described it as a prehistoric assassination. 5. The political theory, could this have been bigger than just Steve? That copper axe, remember? Copper was rare, only the elite had access to it. Maybe Steve wasn't just a hunter or traveler. Maybe he was a leader, a shaman, or someone with status, and someone else wanted to take his place. In small tribal societies, power transitions weren't peaceful. Leadership could be challenged with arrows, not ballots. If Steve represented authority, then his death may have been a political coup. Alpine edition. Whatever the truth was, we may never know exactly who pulled the bowstring that ended Steve's life, but the evidence points to one thing: his death was not random, it was planned. And it left enough clues for us 5,000 years later to still be asking why. Most ancient corpses turned to dust, but Steve became a lab, a frozen time capsule with perfectly preserved organ, skin, blood, clothing, tools, even the food in his stomach. Over 3 decades later, we're still learning from him, and what we've learned is nothing short of mind-blowing. Medicine before medicine. Steve had over 60 tattoos, not decorative, but placed directly on joints and areas associated with pain relief. When scientists cross-referenced these spots with acupuncture points, the overlap was striking. This was 5,000 years before traditional Chinese medicine. Could his people have discovered pain management through trial and error? Was Steve undergoing therapy, or was this ritualistic healing? He also carried a fungus on a leather cord known today as Piptoporus betulinus, which has antibacterial properties. This wasn't random. This was prehistoric medicine, ancient DNA. Modern insights. When scientists sequenced Steve's genome in 2012, they were stunned. They found he had brown eyes, lactose intolerance, a high risk for heart disease, and genetic markers for Lyme disease, making him the oldest known case in history. Even crazier, his closest modern relatives live in Sardinia, which raised new questions. Was there ancient migration across the Mediterranean? Was Steve's tribe more connected than we imagined? What he ate and how he died. Again, Steve's final meal was a prehistoric power snack. Ibex meat, high in fat and protein, einkorn wheat, one of the earliest cultivated grains, possibly charcoal, suggesting cooked food and traces of pollen, placing him at lower altitude just hours before death. That means he climbed the mountain the same day he was killed. He wasn't trapped by weather. He was moving, possibly fleeing, possibly hunting, right up until the final ambush. The slow decay of truth. Steve's body also became a case study in forensic preservation. His tissues had been freeze-dried, not mummified. His organs were still recognizable, and his fingernails showed growth lines which scientists used to trace health stress. Weeks before his death, some researchers are even exploring how Steve's unique preservation might help improve modern cryonics, the science of freezing bodies after death. Imagine that. A man who died 5,300 years ago may help us preserve life in the future. And one more twist. In 2010, Steve was re-examined with new forensic techniques. A team noticed that the blood around the arrow wound had pooled in a strange pattern. They now believe the killer may have followed him, waited for the right moment, and shot him while he was turning his back. Cold, calculated, and disturbingly human. Even after 5,000 years, murder still looks the same. Steve was never meant to be remembered. He wasn't a king, or a priest, or a legend in his own time. He was just a man, walking through the mountains, carrying his tools, his pain, and perhaps a secret he never meant to die with. And yet, he became one of the most studied human beings in history. A man who vanished without a name and returned as a global mystery. A mirror across time. What makes Steve unforgettable isn't just his age, it's that he feels so familiar. He had arthritis. He traveled with snacks. He carried medicine. He wore layers when it got cold. He had enemies. He suffered, and in the end, he was alone. Strip away the centuries, and what's left is someone shockingly like us. That's the haunting beauty of Ötzi. He collapses the distance between the ancient and the modern, reminding us that people have always struggled, feared, healed, and fought. A voice from the deep past thanks to science. Ötzi speaks again. His body tells us about early medicine. His gear shows us prehistoric craftsmanship. His death opens a window into the politics, violence, and survival of a world before history books. But it's more than data. There's something deeply human about the fact that 5,000 years later, strangers would care enough to study his life, wonder about his last moments, and try to tell his story. Not a mummy, a messenger. He doesn't lie in a tomb or a shrine. He rests in a high-tech, humidity-controlled chamber in Bolzano, Italy. Visitors can look through glass and see him curled on his side, frozen forever. Some find it eerie, others find it beautiful, but almost everyone agrees. You can't look at Ötzi without wondering, what will we leave behind? In a way, Ötzi isn't just a man from the past. He's a reminder of our future. That long after our cities crumble and our names are forgotten, it might be our bodies, our tools, or final footprint in the ice that tells our story. That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you raise an eyebrow or don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that dusty little bell so you never miss another echo from the past. Drop it in the comments. We're always listening for new echoes. Got a weird bit of history you think we should cover? Until next time, keep your curiosity loud and your history weird. That's it.